David Valdez. I'm an Educateur in Los Angeles. Just thought this was important to have because not everybody knows it. AOC, Appellation d'Origine Contrôlée. Institut National de l'Origine et de la Qualité, which is the body that regulates AOCs. Conseil Interprofessionnel du Vin de Bordeaux, which is an umbrella organization of Bordeaux producers. And the Institut National de la Recherche Agronomique, which is exactly that. It's agronomical research, agriculture, and they do research. January 26, 2021, the INAO, which I will not explain, officially approved 6 new varietals that can be used in Bordeaux. Arinarnoa, Castets, Marselan, Touriga Nacional, the reds, Albarino, and Liliorila, the whites. According to the Conseil de Vin de Bordeaux, this was a culmination of over a decade of research, and it was specifically addressing the possibility of climate change. 52 non-Bordeaux varietals were tested, and they proposed to the INAO 7 varietals, and INAO rejected Petit Manseng, but Petit Manseng is grown in the Pyrenees, and it's a very specific area of the Pyrenees that grows Petit Manseng, and it's recognized as a unique grape. So basically the INAO said, no, let's leave the Pyrenees alone. This was part of a wider initiative from an organization that is all the AOCs, Viticos, coming together. And they, mostly what they wanted to do, and this is important, is establish a procedure to evaluate new and ancient varieties, because this system has been static for a long time, to address specific threats such as climate change. It's important to realize that these varietals are experimental. Willing producers can participate in the experiment. An observation period of 10 years. They will be evaluating viticultural experience and the wines that they are able to produce as single varietals or blends, right? After 10 years, there's 3 possible outcomes. One is permanent adoption, which means that you will see all these grapes in your Bordeaux. Extension of the evaluation period for a minimum of 5 years, or just basically no, you can't have this. So 3 possible outcomes, experimental. During the observation period, production cannot be more than 5% of an individual grower's production. So they don't want people like planting exclusively one of these varietals. And the new varietals cannot exceed 10% of a blend, which means that you'll never see them on a label, because labeling laws say if it's not more than 10%, you can't put it on the label. So you'll never see it. I'm going to speak briefly about the white varietals, because you don't have them in front of you. Most of you must be familiar with Albarino. Albarino is native to the North Atlantic part of Spain, very well suited to maritime climates, which makes it attractive for Bordeaux. Very hardy. It mutates readily. Actually, it's a very adaptable varietal. And it produces aromatic, fine wines with good acidity. So Albarino is grown in California, Albarino is grown in Spain, Albarino is grown all over the place. It's widely planted. Liliorila, on the other hand, was a deliberate cross developed in 1956 by the INRA, the Research Institute, which is a cross of Baroque and Chardonnay. You've probably never heard of Baroque. This is, in the entirety of France, there's 3 hectares planted with this. This is not a popular varietal, but it produces aromatic, powerful, fragrant wines with low acidity. So those are your whites. Now in front of you, you have Arinarnoa. What is Arinarnoa? Arinarnoa is a cross between Tannat and Cabernet Sauvignon. Developed in 1956. There's about 120 hectares of cultivation, mostly in Languedoc and the Provence. It's planted more widely in Spain and Lebanon. It's reached Argentina. Uruguay, the Uruguay wine industry is based largely on this grape. The wine is deep in color, tannic, firmly structured with complex aroma. Castets is a natural cross. It's actually Gros Cabernet and Camarao Noir, which are native varietals of Bordeaux, at some point in time crossed. And they produce this hybrid. Well, it's not a hybrid, but a new varietal. It hasn't been exploited widely, the 6 hectares in all of France in 2018. But it is grown in Spain, where it is known as Maturana Tinta. Produces very colored, relatively alcoholic, but not very acidic wine. Marselan, another cross. This one was obtained in 1961. It is a cross of Grenache and Cabernet Sauvignon. Not widely adopted because it was very low yield, but lately people are planting it because it is disease resistant, and by disease, I mean mildew. In France, almost 500 hectares, it's multiplied very rapidly. So if you think that in 2000 there was 500 hectares and now there's 6,000 hectares. Full-bodied aromatic with a unique and interesting structure. Touriga produces the fine wines of Portugal, the Douro valleys, and it is also a key ingredient in port. Very limited in France, 12 hectares as of 2018. Widely adopted in Australia. There's a whole region in Australia that is planted with Touriga. People used to think that Touriga outside of Portugal was not commercially viable because the yield was low, but lately new clones have been developed that are more productive. Bold, dark fruits, firm tannins, great aging potential. This is a well-established fine wine. So, taste. So just so you know, these are not samples. These are commercial wines. Some of them were very hard to find, but they are commercial wines. They can be bought. These are all 100%. The Arinarnoa comes from Languedoc. The Castets comes from Spain, from Navarra. The Castets is actually Uruguayan. The Marselan, I'm sorry, the Marselan. The Marselan is from Uruguay, and the Touriga is from Portugal, so not a big surprise. So we're not really discussing which one is good or which one you like. What we're discussing is what are the characteristics of each varietal. We're going to pour in a second round, which we're going to have after the second half of the presentation, blends that are going to be 75% merlot and 25% of each of these varietals.
Oh, wow, nice.
So why are we doing this? Because we are preparing for climate change. So to understand why we're doing this, we have to remember how you make a fine wine. First thing, not too hot, not too cold. Low risk of frost damage, low risk of extreme heat, and a long maturation period. And you know, Bordeaux is good because all these 4 things happen. Especially, what you need is a gentle transition from summer to fall. A slow maturation where the acidity is slowly diminishing and the alcohol is slowly going up and the phenols and the esters and all the other wonderful things are happening. Absent these conditions, you can use it for sangria. less colored, less aromatic, lacking in subtlety, and can be overly alcoholic. So this is the definition of bad wine versus good wine, right? This is, yes, less good wine. Few crops are more susceptible to climate change than grapes, because the optimal range to produce fine wine, not to produce it, you can produce anything almost everywhere, but to produce fine wine, you start with Pinot Gris at 56 degrees, optimal. Optimal range, Nebbiolo goes up to 69. So within this range, which is 12 degrees Fahrenheit, that's how you make fine wine. For specific varietals, Pinot Noir, to make fine wine, grows in this narrow range of average temperature during the growing season. Pinot Gris, Riesling, Alsatian wine, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Semillon, now the Bordeaux, Cabernet Franc, Merlot, Cabernet Sauvignon, and then Sangiovese and Nebbiolo, which are Italian wines, as we all know. And table grapes, you can produce those because there's a lot of sugar in them. Depending on what happens, depending on how extreme this gets, there's going to be a big shakeup in wine-producing regions. There is already, people are planting Pinot Noir in Alsace, which was unheard of 20 years ago. And they're producing decent Pinot Noir. If trends continue, the Yukon and Yosemite will become viable grape areas, which right now they aren't because they're the Yukon. Yeah. Regions will expand their grape selections. I mentioned Alsace as an example. And some regions will cease production altogether. Actually, Australia is one of the most threatened regions because once there's large areas that would move into that not fine wine scale. So absent other factors, varietal choices could migrate as much as 500 kilometers, which is essentially the distance between Napa and Portland, Oregon. You could be planting Cabernet Sauvignon in Portland in 25 years or 30 years. And the question is then, what do you grow in Napa? But that's a different. Touriga Nacional. So what else happens with climate change? The range of insects and the diseases they carry expands, follows the average temperature. One good example is the sharpshooter, which right now is in Temecula, but as things go up, it'll move up. And the second thing is fungal disease pressure. So as things get warmer, there's more pressure, and we'll discuss this a little bit more. The other impacts, post-budding cold snaps, and what I mean by that is the vines produce shoots, they bud, and then you get a frost. And that causes severe damage to that harvest. Heat waves, and finally, our friend wildfires. Climate change is not uniform. Greater warming over land than over water because the water sort of is colder, so mediates the change in temperature. Greater warming at higher latitudes, which kind of seems a little bit illogical, but at higher latitudes you'll go up 5 degrees. In the middle you'll go up 3. Precipitation will essentially increase middle latitudes and will decrease in higher latitudes and the equator. Precipitation will change as a result of climate change. And for Bordeaux, let's be specific about Bordeaux. What is the greatest risk for Bordeaux? There's a prediction that it could weaken or completely stop the Gulf Stream. So there's many models that predict that Bordeaux could actually turn cooler. We might have less aromatic and lighter colored wines because it's colder or it's warmer. It moves it out of the range. Not to mention sea level rises. I don't know if you remember from a couple of years back, we discussed how a lot of the left bank was drained. It was swampy. So as the sea level goes up, a lot of those swampy areas will become subject to periodic flooding or just get submerged again. And second is the increased salinity of the groundwater as the ocean goes up. So what do the new varietals bring to the table? Ideally, what we're looking for is longer maturation periods, so that as opposed to maturing in September, we can still get, as opposed to maturing in August, we can still get September or the early part of October. Resistance to pests, we discussed that impact. Hardiness and adaptability, because we really don't know what's going to happen. So we need varietals that can adapt. And finally, increased versatility in blending. The reference in this chart is chasselas. I don't know if any of you had the opportunity to taste chasselas. Chasselas is the Swiss grape. Why is the Swiss grape chasselas? Because it, on average, bud breaks March 21st, and it's done in 140 days. Short time frame, because it gets cold up there. Sauvignon Blanc, Semillon, 150 days from bud break to harvest, on average. Liliorila and Albarino. It's interesting, Albarino is longer growing season, but Liliorila is shorter growing season. So why are we doing this, right? Cabernet Sauvignon, somewhere between 145 and 150 days between bud break and maturity, on average. Merlot, 155. Castets, 140. So again, very quick, very short growing season. Arinarnoa, 150 to 155, so much like Cabernet. Touriga, on the other hand, and Marselan are both very longer seasons. So the answer is, it's not a single factor, right? So what do they have in common? Number one, they're drought resistant. So basically, it's 4 varietals that can withstand low precipitation, and they're all pest resistant. Greater resistance, especially to mildew. They also are attractive blending varietals. Highly aromatic. Does everybody agree with the idea that these are that the Marselan is highly aromatic? So if you're having, because of climate change, you're having lighter wines, or you're having less aromatic wines, throwing in a little Marselan might just move the needle. And secondly, highly colored. I mean, if you look at all these wines, they're all very dark. So it's, again, a solution to the problem if you start getting lighter colored wines. You throw in a little bit of this and you're back in business. It gives Bordeaux growers a wider tool set to adapt to conditions. The lessons that they're learning from these experiments could apply more broadly, and in a rapid change scenario, there's just more varietals to work with. So let me say one thing which is really important, which is varietal change is not, I think Hubert mentioned some of this, is not the only way to control climate change. You just change the way you do viticulture. You delay the pruning, you increase the wine trunk height, so it looks more like California and less like France. Night harvesting, reduce plant density, and just choose differently what plots you're going to plant. So there are other ways to deal with this, which is why when you see a Bordeaux vineyard and you see a Napa vineyard, they're different. Just to put it in context, when the classification was done in 1855, Bordeaux was planted 60% to Malbec. So there is varietal change happening all the time. The varietal you're going to put on the ground is the one that maximizes profitability. That's what growers are doing. So growers follow the markets. If people don't like something anymore, they change it and they plant something else. increased yield is always attractive to the grower. And the Duke of Burgundy in 1345 prohibited the planting of gamay in the Côte d'Or because everybody was switching to gamay because it produces more. It's higher yielding. So it was prohibited because otherwise you wouldn't have higher quality wine, you would just have more wine, which is more profit always. The grower wants to have more grapes. And like I said, the Duke of Burgundy regulated the varietals that could be planted in Burgundy centuries ago. So it's not new that we're regulating what you can and cannot plant. Let's remember what the AOC system is about. It's meant to prevent change. It's meant to say, in Bordeaux, you can only plant these varietals. You cannot decide one day to plant something else. You have to use these varietals. It provides a fixed standard for quality. This is Bordeaux. This is Bordeaux. And it maintains it is designed to maintain the characteristics of the regulated product so that it has a certain characteristic. That's what the AOC system is meant to do. So what's the accomplishment? The accomplishment is a process to produce change. Because the AOC system is conservative, bureaucratic, and corporate. It has to be the umbrella organization of like several AOC viticultural unions that has to talk to the INAO. It's not like I can decide what to do differently. So time will tell if the AOC system will delay adaptation as opposed to help it along. Just so we know, there is already a reaction. Petit Bordeaux is, the new plantings of Petit Bordeaux are up 200% since 2018. It's late ripening. It just has a longer growing season. And what's going to happen is as varietals show their adaptability to change conditions, the blends will change. We're going to have more of this, less of that. So the wine will evolve. It's not like things are static. Will it make a difference? One of the discussions we had where we got samples, and I think it was the guy from Lynch Bosch who say, they grow Cab and Napa, don't they? So, there you go. So the character of the wines may evolve, and probably will. But Bordeaux will always be Bordeaux.